My name is Margaret Vance. I am 71 years young, a woman who has spent a lifetime believing in the solid ground of a long and loving marriage. For 45 years, that belief was embodied by my husband, Robert. We built a life together, brick by brick, from the ground up, a life that felt as sturdy and unshakable as the old oak tree in our front yard. That sense of security, that quiet rhythm of our existence, was shattered not with a sudden earthquake, but with a series of quiet, insidious tremors. The first was the call he got at dinner. I was in the middle of telling him about my volunteer work at the community center, something I took great pride in, when his phone buzzed. It was a text. He looked at it, and a strange, almost nervous smile flickered across his face. He excused himself, but not before I caught a glimpse of the contact name, Clara, work. I thought nothing of it. He was a successful financial advisor, and Clara was his new young secretary. I had met her once at a company picnic. She was in her late 20s, with a bright, almost jarring confidence and a way of speaking to Robert that seemed far too familiar for a professional relationship. I dismissed the thought. My husband was a man of integrity, a man who had chosen me, not once, but every single day for nearly 5 decades. But the tremors continued. He began working later and later. His phone was always in his hand, a new, almost frantic energy about him. When I asked him what was wrong, he'd simply say, "Work is hectic, Margaret. It's a busy time." I tried to believe him. I wanted to believe him. The woman I had been for so long, the trusting, loving wife, could not comprehend a life in which her husband was not entirely hers. I made his favorite meals, meatloaf with mashed potatoes, lemon meringue pie, in a desperate attempt to lure him back to the simple comfort of our home life. But the house, once filled with the quiet murmur of our shared routine, grew colder, the silence heavier. The second tremor was his 70th birthday. Our 2 children, Sarah and Mark, organized a surprise party. We had a beautiful dinner, a cake, and a toast that celebrated our lives together. All I wanted was to sit across from my husband, surrounded by the family we had built, and feel the warmth of our connection. But Robert was on his phone. He was not present. He would excuse himself to take a work call, only to be gone for 10 minutes, his face a mask of agitation when he returned. His eyes never met mine. Not once did he look at me with the quiet affection I had grown to expect. I felt invisible. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The final, devastating earthquake came on a Thursday morning, the day I went to his office to surprise him with a thermos of his favorite coffee. I had been looking forward to this small gesture of love all week, and it felt like an important step in reclaiming our routine. But when I got there, I found his office door slightly ajar. I stopped, my hand on the handle, as I heard his voice. He was not on the phone. He was speaking to Clara. I heard him laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years, a light, joyful, almost boyish sound. "You know, Clara," he said, and I heard the rustle of papers. "I'm so glad I'm leaving. I feel like I'm finally living." This whole family man thing was becoming a little stifling. Clara laughed, a high, tinkling sound. "And a little boring, darling. You deserve more than that. You're too young to be a retiree, too handsome to be stuck with, well, you know." A beat of silence. "I know," Robert said, and his voice was full of a bitter finality that stole the breath from my lungs. "I've decided to leave Margaret. I'm telling her tonight." My hand fell away from the door handle. I did not enter. I did not scream. I did not confront them. I simply turned and walked away. The thermos of coffee, once a symbol of my love, felt like a lead weight in my hand. I walked through the city as if in a daze, the noise of the traffic, the shouts of the people, everything fading into a low hum. I felt a coldness I had never known before, a coldness that had nothing to do with the outside air and everything to do with the hollow space where my heart used to be. My life with Robert had been a beautiful lie, a magnificent structure built on shifting sand. And with one final, casual remark, he had brought the entire thing crashing down. When I got home, I did not cry. I did not throw things. I simply put the thermos on the kitchen counter, removed my coat, and sat down at the kitchen table. The silence of the house was a physical presence, a weight that settled over me. And then a new feeling began to stir. It was not grief, not sorrow, but something sharper, colder, and far more determined. I thought of the things I had given up for Robert, the dreams I had quietly shelved for the sake of his career, our children, our home. I thought of my love, a river I had poured out for him for nearly 5 decades. And in that moment, I knew with a chilling clarity that I would not be the victim of his convenient midlife crisis. He wanted a new life. He would get one. And so would I. But neither of them would be getting anything else from me. My quiet, unnoticed life of giving was over. Now it was time for consequences. Robert's words hung in the air, a cruel, invisible fog that filled every room of our once sacred home. My heart, once so full, felt as though it had been emptied out, leaving behind a cold, desolate space. He had done it, just as he said he would. He had left me. It was not a grand dramatic scene, but a casual, almost polite affair. He sat me down in the living room, the one we had picked out furniture for together all those years ago, and with a voice that was both weary and detached, he told me he was moving on. "I'm sorry, Margaret," he said, as if apologizing for a minor inconvenience, "but I need to live my own life." I looked at this man, my husband of 45 years. His face, once so familiar, was a mask of polite indifference. "You know, Margaret," he continued, "Clara and I, we have so much in common. She understands me in a way you don't." He talked about their shared passion for travel, for new experiences, for a life I had never known he craved. He spoke of our life as if it had been a cage, a burden he had only just found the courage to escape from. The quiet moments, the shared dinners, the comfortable silence, all the things I had cherished, he had apparently endured. And then, as if an afterthought, he handed me a single piece of paper. "I've spoken to a lawyer," he said, "and this is what's fair. The house is yours, and so is the joint savings account." He did not mention my investments, the ones I had quietly made over the years, the ones he was entirely oblivious to. He had no idea about the money I had squirreled away, the stocks I had bought, the real estate I had invested in without his knowledge. He just assumed that the few $100,000 in our joint account was everything. "I'll be staying at a hotel for a few weeks until Clara and I find a place," he said, and then he was gone. He walked out the door and out of my life, leaving me with a piece of paper, a hollow apology, and a house filled with silence. The pain, sharp and immediate at first, gradually gave way to a cold, focused anger. It was not a screaming, crying anger, but a quiet, methodical rage that settled deep in my bones. I had spent 45 years giving him everything, and in return, he had given me nothing but lies and a quiet, humiliating dismissal. He thought he had left me with what's fair. He thought he had left me with a comfortable life. But what he didn't realize was that what he had taken was not the money, but my dignity. And that was where the revenge would begin. He wanted a new life. He would get one. But it would be a life without the financial security he so desperately needed. I knew what he would do. He would assume that because I was a woman of my age, I would be easily intimidated. He would assume that because our children were his children, they would side with him. He would assume that because he had been the financial breadwinner, he was the only one with any power. But he was wrong on all counts. My first move was to call our children, Sarah and Mark. Sarah, our daughter, a lawyer herself, was furious. "How could he do this?" she shrieked over the phone. "To you? After everything you've done for him." Mark, our son, a successful businessman, was more practical. "We need to handle this, Mom. We need to hire the best lawyer." They were a united front, a team, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. But then I remembered Robert's words, his casual betrayal, and a new plan began to form in my mind. No, I would not use a lawyer. I would not engage in a messy, public battle. I would handle this myself, with quiet precision, just as I had handled everything else in my life. The next morning, I went to my bank. I walked in, my head held high, and sat down with a young, eager-looking man. "I'd like to open a new account," I said, my voice as steady as an ocean stone. "And I'd like to transfer all the money from my personal investments and accounts into it." He looked at me with a polite but dismissive smile. Of course, ma'am. Do you have a power of attorney from your husband? He had no idea. He had no idea that for decades, I had been the one making the real money, the one managing the real estate, the one making the real investments. I simply smiled. I will not be needing one. The money is mine. I opened my briefcase and laid out the documentation, the deeds to the properties, the stock certificates, the account statements. The young man's eyes went wide. His polite smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. He had assumed I was a helpless old woman. He had assumed I had no power. But he was wrong. And so was Robert. The days following Robert's departure were a peculiar mix of profound silence and seething tension. Inside the house, a cold, focused anger began to settle deep in my bones, a feeling I had never before experienced. He had left me with a piece of paper and a hollow apology, believing he had been generous by leaving me the house and the joint savings account. He was completely oblivious to the quiet financial storm I had set in motion, the years I had spent quietly building my own fortune through investments he knew nothing about. He assumed I would be a helpless old woman, easily intimidated, but he was wrong. My first move was to call our children, Sarah and Mark. Sarah, a lawyer, was furious, her voice a shriek of disbelief and anger. "How could he do this to you, Mom?" she demanded. Mark, our son, was more practical. "We need to hire the best lawyer," he insisted. They were a united front, a team, and their support was a balm on my wounded spirit. But I knew that a public battle would be messy and humiliating. I decided to handle this myself, with quiet precision, just as I had handled everything else in my life. I did not mention my hidden wealth, only that I was handling things. Meanwhile, Robert was making himself at home in his new life. As I later learned from a mutual friend, he and Clara had moved into a chic downtown apartment, which she had furnished with her exquisite taste. He was openly boasting about his newfound freedom and likely believed I was at home, weeping into my tea and waiting for his inevitable return. But I was not. I was tending to my rose garden, and with each snip of the shears, I felt a grim, quiet satisfaction. My revenge would not be loud, it would be silent, a quiet unraveling of his convenient new life. The first hint of trouble for him came a week after his departure. Robert called, his voice strained and almost cheerful. "Margaret," he said, "I need you to transfer some money from the joint account. Clara and I are buying a new car and the dealership needs a down payment." I felt a small, knowing smile touch my lips. "I am sorry, Robert," I replied, my voice as steady as a stone. "But I have decided to close that account. All transactions are now being handled by my personal bank." He laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Your personal bank?" "Margaret, do not be silly." "What are you talking about?" he said, as if I were a child playing a game. I felt a surge of empowerment. "I am talking about a new life, Robert. A life where I am in control of my own finances." He tried to belittle me, to call me a vindictive old woman, but I simply listened, my quiet fury growing with each word. He would not be getting a single cent from me. The real conflict began when he tried to sell our beach house, an asset he had always considered his to do with as he pleased. He had put the property on the market without even asking me. The agent, a friend of his, called me to let me know about the paperwork. I, in turn, called my lawyer, a stern and precise woman named Eleanor, whom I had hired years ago to manage my secret affairs. "Eleanor," I said, "it is time to file the paperwork for the sole ownership of the beach house." My lawyer did not question me. She simply did as I asked, a quiet, almost invisible hand moving the pieces on the chessboard. The next day, the real estate agent called Robert, perplexed. "Robert," he said, "the paperwork came back. The beach house is in Margaret's name only." He was furious. He called me, his voice a scream of rage and disbelief, demanding to know what I had done. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Robert," I lied, a cold satisfaction in my voice. "The house has been in my name for years. You must have forgotten." He did not know about my investments, the quiet, methodical work I had done to build a life independent of him. He thought he was leaving a helpless old woman, but he had left a woman with a plan. He had left a woman who was no longer afraid. He wanted to live on his own terms. Now he would learn what that truly meant. My calm demeanor was a weapon, and Robert was walking directly into the line of fire. His phone calls, at first, had been filled with rage and disbelief. "What have you done with the beach house?" he would scream. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Robert," I would reply, my voice as calm as a summer lake. "The house has been in my name for years. You must have forgotten." My coolness infuriated him, and he would hang up, only to call back minutes later, his voice more frantic, his accusations more unhinged. He had always been a man who believed in control, and now he was losing it. I, Margaret, had taken it all away. He finally came to the house a week later. The doorbell rang with an impatient, demanding trill. I opened the door to find him, not the confident, polished man who had left, but a disheveled stranger. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale and drawn, and his eyes held a desperate panic I had never seen before. "Margaret," he said, his voice a low growl, "this isn't a game. The bank is calling about the accounts. The real estate agent is threatening to sue. Clara and we can't get a loan. You have to give me the money." He looked at me, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. He still believed he had power over me. He still believed I would give in. I simply stood in the doorway, my hands folded calmly across my chest. "Give you the money?" I asked. "Robert, what money are you referring to?" He looked at me as if I were a madwoman. "The money from the accounts. The investments. The beach house," he yelled, his voice rising in frustration. "You are not a financial genius, Margaret. You have no idea what you are doing. You are going to ruin us both." He still did not know. He still believed that he, Robert, was the only one who had managed our finances, the only one with any power. "I have done nothing but what you have taught me, Robert," I said, a bitter smile touching my lips. "For 45 years, I watched you manage our finances. I learned from the best." He looked at me in shock, his face a mask of disbelief. You can't have," he stammered. "I handled everything." "Did you?" I asked. "Did you handle the small investments I made with my inheritance? The stocks I bought with my pension? The properties I acquired with the money I saved from our household budget?" He had no answers. He had no words. He simply stood there, a man who had thought he had everything, now realizing he had nothing. "And what about the house, Robert?" I continued, my voice now as sharp as a shard of glass. "The house you so generously left me? The house you walked out of without a single glance back? The house where you left me to live with your ghost and the ghost of our life together?" He had no reply. He had no retort. All he had was silence, a silence so profound it filled the entire house. He had been so sure of his power, so convinced of his victory, but he had been wrong. He had left me with nothing but a broken heart, but I was now leaving him with nothing but broken dreams. He finally turned and walked away. He did not ask for my forgiveness. He did not ask for a second chance. He just walked away, a defeated man, a man who had thought he had everything, now realizing he had nothing at all. He had wanted a new life, and he had gotten one. But it was a life he had never anticipated, a life without the financial cushion he had so desperately needed. And I, Margaret, had finally found my freedom, a freedom I had earned with a quiet, patient, and methodical revenge. The weeks following Robert's visit were the quietest our house had ever known. His frantic calls and enraged visits stopped abruptly. It was as if he had finally understood that I, Margaret, was no longer a resource to be exploited, but a force to be reckoned with. The silence was not empty. It was full of a new kind of freedom I hadn't felt in decades. I started to live a life for myself. I hired a gardener to tend to my beloved roses, freeing up my hands for new hobbies. I enrolled in a pottery class, something I had always wanted to do but had never had the time for. I bought a small, elegant car, not a luxury SUV like Robert's, but one that was reliable and entirely my own. I had not told our children, Sarah and Mark, the full extent of my financial maneuverings. I wanted them to see my transformation on my own terms. They called regularly, worried about my well-being. "Are you all right, Mom?" Sarah would ask. "Is Dad still trying to?" "I am perfectly fine," I would reply. "Your father is handling his own affairs now." I could hear the confusion in their voices, but they knew better than to pry. They had always respected my quiet strength, and they continued to do so now. The final act came on a crisp autumn morning, 2 months after Robert's departure. The doorbell rang, and I knew before I even opened the door that it was him. He stood there, not with the panic I had seen before, but with a defeated look in his eyes. He was alone. His clothes, once so impeccable, were rumpled, and his shoulders, once so broad, were slumped. "Margaret," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, "I need to talk to you. I have nowhere else to go." He came inside, and for the first time, he did not look around the room with an air of entitlement. He just sat on the edge of the sofa, a man who had lost everything. "Clara left," he said, his voice void of emotion. "She said she didn't sign up for this. She said she wanted a man who could take care of her, not a project." He paused, and I saw a single tear fall down his cheek. "I lost everything, Margaret. The car, the apartment, it was all in her name. She took it all and left." He looked at me with a desperate, pleading expression. "I came to you, Margaret. I know I was wrong. I was a fool. I thought I could have it all, but I had nothing." He was a broken man. He was the man who had left me with a piece of paper, a hollow apology, and a house filled with silence. He had left me with a nothing, and now he had his own nothing to contend with. But he had one more card to play. "Margaret," he said, his voice trembling, "I've spoken to a lawyer. You took all of my assets, all of my savings. I have nothing. I'm going to sue." He looked at me, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. He still believed he had power over me. He still believed he could intimidate me. But he was wrong. I simply stood in the doorway, my hands folded calmly across my chest. "You're going to sue, Robert?" I asked. "For what? For the money from the accounts? The investments? The beach house?" His face, a mask of bewilderment and shock, was my final victory. You can't have," he stammered. "I handled everything." I simply smiled. "I, Robert, have done nothing but what you have taught me. For 45 years, I watched you manage our finances. I learned from the best." He had no answers. He had no words. He simply stood there, a man who had thought he had everything, now realizing he had nothing. He had wanted a new life, and he had gotten one. But it was a life he had never anticipated, a life without the financial cushion he had so desperately needed. He had left me with nothing but a broken heart, but I was now leaving him with nothing but broken dreams. He finally turned and walked away. He did not ask for my forgiveness. He did not ask for a second chance. He just walked away, a defeated man, a man who had thought he had everything, now realizing he had nothing at all. He had wanted a new life, and he had gotten one. But it was a life he had never anticipated, a life without the financial cushion he had so desperately needed. And I, Margaret, had finally found my freedom, a freedom I had earned with a quiet, patient, and methodical revenge. The quiet, unnoticed life of giving was over. Now it was time for consequences.